So the next speaker is Ben Hawes. Now, Ben is the engagement director for the Benchmark initiative. So Ben has vast experience in dealing with government in terms of AI, IoT, intellectual property, and smart cities. Now, Ben is going to talk about something which I believe is probably more important than any data dashboard or any IoT sensor. It is the responsible use of location data. So, and I believe from the work that we've done with Patrum that unless we get this right, it could undermine all our efforts in terms of smart towns. So no pressure, Ben, over to you. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me. It's great to be on this panel, and it's great to see so many people interested. 7 years or so ago, I was the government policy lead in Whitehall on smart cities, which sounds great, but actually I was also the whole of the team, and I really struggled to get anyone else in government to care or to really appreciate what local government and local services can do with technology. And I must say, if it feels hard sometimes now, it was there were a lot fewer people listening then. So I'm going to talk about responsible use of location data, a little about why I think that could matter to you, and then I'm going to finish with talking about some guidelines we've put together on how to sort of support making good decisions. So for the last year or so, I've been working with Ordnance Survey and the Omidyar Network, which is an international foundation created by one of the PayPal founders, on Benchmark, which is to promote responsible use of location data. We've funded some entrepreneurs, we've done a year of events, and now we're putting together some final outputs and some ways to sort of encourage this work to go along. Why do we care? Well, really because location data has got, applications have got a lot more effective really very quickly. All sorts of organizations that are creating apps for this and that can suddenly add location services into them in a way that they couldn't before. Awful lot of benefits for this on improving supply chains, services, planning, development, environmental monitoring, consumer services, and in the last year we've seen a whole load of new things about managing public spaces, managing spaces at work, and there's huge advantages in these new applications, but with those advantages come potential harms, as Spider-Man and others have pointed out. With power comes responsibility. There are impacts on individuals, there are a lot of potential unintended impacts and effects on groups and on the environment, on society. Really, this is very similar to every other wave of new data technologies that create winners and losers and huge potential, but also potential harms. And datafication, managing the world with data, does tend to generate the same kinds of risks in different data areas. So bias in data sets that affect, people can be unrepresented or overrepresented. Intrusions into privacy, which I think we've seen a lot of with internet data, but we're probably only just really starting to think about location data. Market power and data colonialism. Big corporate holders of data can achieve, power over markets and over individuals that they didn't have before. And then complexity. As services get more advanced, it becomes harder and harder to see why decisions are made or to trace back, and explain it. Anyone working in the public sector, that requirement to be able to give a good explanation is actually a lot more important than it is generally for private sector companies. So why does it matter to you? Well, you're well aware location is going to get embedded into much of what you do and your decision processes more and more. I think the pandemic has shown lots of place managers, those councils, that they couldn't get hold of information about what was going on quickly enough, and I think we'll see a lot of interest in changing that. We're seeing, that the managing buildings and public spaces was already a lively area. The pandemic has made people care a lot more about that. We're going to anyway see a lot more automation, and as we've been saying, more Internet of Things services. So there's huge potential for getting resources to the right place and the right time. But as I say, with datafication, you get new risks. And above all, also more surveillance and more fear of surveillance and greater responsibilities. As you have more and more detailed and potentially intrusive data in the process of delivering a better service, you'll also have new responsibilities to deal with the risks attendant on that. And yes, the complexity will also throw up new questions. We're going to see this sort of great new possibilities, and I think that the prices of sensors and things are coming down to make this much more possible than it was a few years ago, to have live and detailed information and monitoring of citizen sentiments from social media. But yes, putting all of this together and treating people with the fairness and the duties that you already have in local services is going to get more complicated. So after a year of running events and discussions on location data and what the risks are, and crucially also how to deal with the risks and get the benefits, we being Benchmark, our US colleagues, but also a series of roundtables with people from all over the world, we've put together some proposed principles to guide use of location data and really help people to make the right decisions. I think there's most people using location data are trying to do the right thing, but unless you know which questions to ask, that can be quite hard. So we've started off with the first principle really being the positive one. This isn't all about what you can't do. It's about a duty to actually realize the benefits that are in location data set, to realize them responsibly, but definitely to be positive at realizing them. Second, well, really to understand the impacts. As I say, a lot of the potential harms will be unintended harms, but if you're using detailed location data that refers to communities, it's important to know what can, you have the responsibility to find out what could go wrong. Do no harm, sort of the basic sort of ethical principle, to avoid discrimination, exploitation, and harm. And principle 4, to go the extra mile, to take additional care where vulnerable groups, vulnerable places may be involved. To address bias, that could be bias that leaves people out of a data set, so they fail to get services, or actually can overemphasize people in data sets, a problem that's very big in policing, notably, well-known risks there. To minimize intrusion, well, it's really to say that the use of spatial data should go no further really than it needs to, and should take care to treat people and places with dignity, and to go no more intrusive than they need to be. And supporting that is the principle to minimize data, to use no more detailed. It's really the data minimization principle of using only the necessary personal data that's adequate and relevant, and limited to the objective. It's really, that's reading across from the GDPR sense of that. Principle 8, perhaps the most obvious one, is simply to protect privacy. Don't use aggregated and anonymized location data where you can, and use data that identifies only individuals with great care and with consent where that's possible and proportionate. And then actively to prevent identification of individuals, which becomes more difficult, obviously, as the data becomes more granular. But this also means to be concerned with potential secondary uses of the data. So if you've collected a data set for one purpose and one service for vulnerable people, that it's necessary to take extra care on what might happen to that later. And to provide accountability, finally, the principle is that people who are represented in a location data set that's used by an organization, they should be able to interrogate how it's collected and how it's used in relation to them and their interests, and to be able to appeal proportionately how that uses are made. Clearly, this, I call this principles. There's a lot of proportionality in here. You can't demand that anyone who's even slightly in a data set can interrogate everything about it, but these things should be proportionate to potential harms. And I suppose I wanted to end up by adding on to this the question of whether this should also lead us to think a little bit more about those being principles for all users of location data. I wondered if we need to revisit this sort of ethics of local services and bolster those with these same questions with a sort of geospatial lens, and looking at the extra responsibilities and what are the positive solutions that allow you to deliver better, more granular, more efficient services while avoiding all potential harms to citizens and vulnerable groups. And I think there's a lot of work starting to go on in this, and it would be great to see more people join that conversation. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ben. As I said, this is something we've taken an interest in, obviously, as part of the work we're doing with Patrum. And I think that footfall data is probably the one piece of data that's crucial in a smart town, because then you can measure the impact of any intervention. A question which is probably more rhetorical really is who decides what is proportional? Because it's very subjective, isn't it? What is a proportional use of data? And I think this is important, especially for local authorities and Welsh governments, because there's sensitivity around location data. So, Ben, one question is, who would then decide what is proportional? Who would have a view on what is proportional use of data?
Well, I think the purpose of these principles is for people providing services to use them themselves. So, actually the answer is you work out, if you're providing the service, first of all, you work out the answer to that question, because you're best placed to do it. And I think these are guidelines to prompt people to ask the questions and to help them, work those things out. But, ultimately that's going to be very specific to context, and it's extremely difficult to rule on it from the outside. But it's proportional to specificity, it's proportional to the kind of harms. But as I say, really, it's only when you've thought through those that you're able to make that kind of decision.
Okay, thank you very much.
But I would say that as I said at the beginning, it's different if you're providing local services. It's not the same as running a consumer internet service. You already have a whole load of duties and responsibilities. So really it's about how do you work to your existing duties and responsibilities with new kinds of data sets.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben.